Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Please subscribe and leave a like because it really helps. Thank you. The beginning and the Hallstatt Celts. That's where we're at. The beginning of the Celts was centered in Europe, and just like every single culture, even the ones that are still apparent today, it went through several stages, different developments. It matured and it became what we know them today. And things like this still happen today as well with various cultures. We're always seeing other things come in and out and such and such. So how can we distinguish them from the very beginning? How can we know? Through their expansion across the continent, they actually absorbed traits that belong to other nations. You have to look carefully to discover the Celts are a mixture of many cultures that they themselves were able to impose their own identity on. There's many aspects of the Celts that we claim today are Celtic, when in fact, truth be known, they're anything but Celtic. They weren't Celtic, they became Celtic. So let's look at the earliest confirmation of the time when Celts came into existence. We're looking around 800 BC. So the archaeological find in Hallstatt, Austria, was made by Johann Georg Ramseur Caesar, 1855. And it was a very defining moment. That discovery put the Celts into a period. We were able to then take a period of when possibly the Celts may have started. The pattern continued. Latte, Switzerland, is another archaeological find of Celts that existed, circa 350 BC, and therefore became known as the Latin period. The second period was claimed to be characterized by a major cultural evolution in people, and as a result, two periods were quite distinct. The first mention of Celts was in the classical world by a name you may know, Herodotus. Herodotus. He referred to the race as Celtoi, which means mysterious people. However, it is found that through others like Titus and Julius Caesar, the name resurfaced many times throughout the ancient world. So again, we're seeing things repeat. Of course, it is claimed that themselves, the Celts, they didn't call themselves that, nor did they have a name to identify themselves with a certain kind of nation. They were just people. You know, they operated on a tribal basis. They knew with each of the owned by the tribe and the similar people, they could identify this just by looking. It's confirmed in various wars that was had with the Greeks and the Romans that they could actually distinguish a person miles away. So they would know their tribe members by calls, by signs. Something that we kind of forget today, that this could still be done, but it's not used, is it? Because we're in modern times and we have other things we can use now. So obviously, Brennus, who is one of the very first to launch a campaign against the Romans circa 387 BC, gathered Celts from all over Central Europe. This was again repeated with I think it was the Vercingetorix in 55 BC in the Gaelic, it's actually pronounced Gaelic, now I forget, sorry. Gaelic rebellion against Caesar, but I would call it Gallic, but yeah, I do think it's probably pronounced that, but I pronounce it Gallic. As mentioned, the Celts referred to each other by tribal nations that they came from. For example, if you have the Belgae, the Iceni, the Daemonian, I think, Adwans, and the Bragantes, that's just a few of the tribes anyway, I do believe. It is like North American Indians. They did not have a name for the type of people that they were. They too called themselves by their tribal identity, like the Cree, the Wendettes, the Ottawas, and the Blackfoot. It's been long discussed where the Celts evolved from, and it seems to me that we avoid any strenuous research, that we just look at writings and simply take that for what it is. The question is, who were the Indo-Europeans? The earliest sources that can be found were the Scythians, Germans, and the Ionians. The Scythians seem to be the dominant group, like the Saxons were dominant. They were like that, the group of Jute-Anglo-Saxon mix. Well, the Scythians, I pronounce it Scythians, but it could be Scythians, because I would pronounce it how it was pronounced in Latin, because that's just how I was learnt. So please understand that it could be Scythians, but the way, the way that I was learnt, I would pronounce it Scythians, because the C is generally pronounced as a K in Latin. That is the only reason. So just wanted to make that clear. But they are the closest link to the Indo-Asian culture. So as you can see, we're already turning and changing. It was claimed that Persians and the Etruscans played roles as well because of what has been found in Celtic burials. However, this was later dismissed because the people in Strabo confirmed some of the artifacts were the results of who the Celts actually traded with. So bear in mind, they would have traded, those things may have ended up in those burial sites, not on purpose, but because they were traded and they were buried with the people. That's important to note as well. In 800 BC, the Celts had commons largely with the Mediterranean nations. They had a particular liking for Greek and the Etruscan wine. The Hochdorf burial, excavated by an archaeologist called, I think it was Hans Hildebrandt, just north of Hallstatt in southern Germany, was the cultural confirmation at this point. Well, towards that point it was anyway. The Hochdorf grave, I think, if I'm correct, is dated back to 600 BC. And with that, they were able to define exactly what Celtic was and what was the items that were just in common trade. It turned out it was simple matter of comparing the two sites, Hallstatt and Hochdorf. For their common art forms, this would give answers. For example, the necktalk was one of the items that distinguished the Celtic people. That's a fact. That's a big thing in the burial sites that they find. So let's look at the Hallstatt period. It was thoroughly explored to see the extent that they grew and the influences, culturally speaking anyway. The reason for this is because there seems to have been development and even confusion between them and another culture known as the, Urnfield people, I think, who existed long before the Celts ever actually came into existence. Their time frame is around 3000 BC and was centred in what is now Portugal. They expanded east and north into Britain, Ireland and central France. Many stone monuments, particularly Stonehenge and Newgrange, are from this culture, not the Celts. Please do not think Stonehenge comes from the Celts. It comes from a very earlier culture, but very prominent like the Celts. And me being what I am and the way I was brought up, it's something that we just have to know. We learn from a very young age about real historic things because we need to know. Yet you'll still find, by the way, tourists and the industry will say that it were Celtic. Trust me, it goes way back before then. Another group from Urnfield people's era was the Druids. Here come the Druids. To this day, they are associated with the Celts, but it appears that's not really true either. The Druids, when you take time to study them, did have a lot to do with the great stone monuments. Thus it seems they were originally from the Urnfield people and not the Celts. The Druids will be addressed in more detail, don't worry, we're not just going to leave it there. So the Urnfield people, they lived in rectangular houses. They were principally agriculture society. Very, I'd say, nomadic in existence of the Celts. And the various aspects of the Enfield people, well, they got mixed with the Celts, but why and how? The answer lies in the fact that the Celts were a warring, conquering people, and the truth centres in their migration. In it, they took on various cultural aspects of the people they conquered, many of whom were builders at the stone monuments, as well as the Druids. Strabo and Julius Caesar were two sources of the migrating nature of the cults. It seems that once Celts grew into a tribal nation, they naturally started to expand their territory. Who wouldn't? Looking at the Scythian, however you want to pronounce it, influence on the Celts, they were for the most part nomadic. The Celts were not ones to sit around. They learned horsemanship, so a majority of the Celts' identity went with horsemanship. As such, it stands to reason they were always on the go. Always on the go. They never stayed in one place too long. Now, there seems to be a pattern of behaviour, and whatever culture evolved from the steppes, like the Huns, Cossacks, and the Scythians, were all great horsemen. It's from their origins the reputation of being warlike people was earned. So when you mix a German element, there also develops a powerful determination as well. When you read up on Titus, the writings of Germans, you discover physical strength of the Celtic people. When the first Celtic slaves were brought to Rome by Ceccio, it depends how you pronounce it again, because in Latin it would be Cecchio, so I don't know. Their physical appearance was said to evoke nothing short of envy. The Celts were described as muscular, tall and blonde, and this was said of their women too. To the dark-haired, short Romans, these slaves inspired wonder, and likely went for a great prize. Well, we know that's a definite, don't we? This naturally begs the question, which of the claimed three cultures had the most influence on the Celtic race? Well, it's a bit of a toss-up. In appearance, the Germans seem to have won out. Celts are described as being unusually big with blonde hair. That's German, and also Viking, very important. It is Viking, even though we're not centred on that time, but that's how we look at Vikings. And we go into structural engineering developments. The Ionian or Mediterranean culture side of the people is very dominant. When you see the craftsmanships that were available in the Celtic people, they were extremely sophisticated. They were more sophisticated than people ever will give them credit for. That's for sure. I'm going to leave this episode here. I hope you're enjoying this, because we have far more deep things to delve into and it's going to get interesting. But yeah, remember, sometimes things are put in history for tourists, for entertainment. Stonehenge has been around long before the Celts were, just like many other monuments. Many blessings. Bye.